Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to tackle one of the absolute most frustrating puzzles in the modern business world. We're diving deep into the exact reasons why most organizational changes fail, and, more importantly, how you can engineer them for guaranteed success. Look, whether you're leading a massive corporate transformation or you're just trying to smooth out a daily workflow with your immediate team, the principles we're unpacking today are an absolute game changer.
Right out of the gate, we've got to look at this completely staggering statistic. According to research by McKinsey, a massive 70% of complex, large-scale change programs ultimately fail. 7 out of 10. I mean, think about that. Despite the millions of dollars thrown at software, training, and strategic consulting, the vast majority of these initiatives just do not stick.
So that creates an immediate, glaring question for us. We've all heard that without change, there's no innovation, right? So if adapting is literally crucial for an organization's survival, why is it so incredibly hard to actually pull off? Why are we always sliding right back into our old habits?
Well, here's our roadmap to figure that out. We'll start with that 70% failure rate, move into the physics of dysfunction, tackle the psychology of resistance, break down the hard side of change, look at Kotter's leadership blueprint, and finally, wrap up with middle managers as change agents.
Okay, part 1, the 70% failure rate. Let's dive in. When a change initiative goes off the rails, our very first instinct is usually to point fingers, right? We blame bad management, poor training, or just, stubborn employees. But research into organizational dynamics shows we need to completely reframe this. Organizations are basically selection environments. A lot of the time, they aren't starved for information about why something's broken. Instead, they're actually drowning in false signals that they actively selected for. They literally reward collective delusion. It's like everyone's sitting there smiling while the house is on fire, which makes it impossible to see what actually needs fixing.
Which brings us to part 2, the physics of dysfunction.
Now, check out this concept of dyskinemic pressure. I know, it sounds super technical, but it's actually a brilliant way to explain how a company's environment can structurally select comfortable lies over hard truths. Basically, dyskinemic pressure is the force that rewards behaviors that help an individual get ahead, even if those exact same behaviors are destroying the organization's ability to adapt. So, organizational failure? It isn't a moral failing of the people working there. It's really more of a structural physics problem.
To really get this, we have to understand what researchers call the Crawford-Sobel bias. This is the tension between internal fitness and external fitness. Internal fitness is what gets you promoted, right? Avoiding conflict, always saying the project is on track, keeping your job secure. But external fitness, that's what keeps the company alive. Adapting to the market, calling out risks. When those two things are negatively correlated, meaning you actually get punished internally for pointing out a very real external risk, communication just falls apart. Think about Nokia's collapse in the smartphone market. Middle managers were terrified of top executives. So they just sent up these wildly optimistic false signals while the ship was literally sinking.
Moving on to part 3, the psychology of resistance.
So when a company does finally decide to make a move, they almost always hit a brick wall of human resistance. But here's the thing. Employee resistance isn't just people being difficult or lazy. It's a deeply rooted, highly predictable psychological reaction to a changing environment. The pushback you're seeing, it's a direct output of some very specific inputs. The research points to 3 main pillars driving this resistance. First up is job insecurity. Change means the unknown, and the unknown naturally threatens people's livelihoods. Second is emotional distress. It's basically a tug of war between anxiety and enthusiasm. If anxiety wins that battle, resistance skyrockets. And third is identity division. That's this jarring feeling of fragmentation between who you are socially and who you are at work when your environment is suddenly flipped upside down. This quote from the literature just hits the nail on the head. Change can undermine the predictability of activity within an organization, leading to frustration and confusion. The big takeaway for us here has to be empathy. We have to recognize that any change initiative, by its very nature, threatens stability and creates real, genuine psychological distress. You can't just mandate compliance. You have to actively manage that anxiety.
Okay, let's pivot to part 4, the hard side of change. So how do we actually build a solid foundation? We use the DICE framework, which was developed by the Boston Consulting Group. It gives us this incredibly rigorous, objective scorecard for an initiative before we even launch it. You've got duration, meaning you want to keep the time between milestone reviews nice and short. Integrity, do you actually have the right team in place? Commitment, are the executives truly visibly dedicated? And effort. This last one is huge, guys. If your new change requires more than a 10% increase in an employee's workload, they are gonna fight it. For sure. You literally have to remove old work to make room for the new work.
That brings us to part 5, Kotter's Leadership Blueprint.
To pull this off, John Kotter's famous 8-step model is the gold standard. It gives us the exact strategic sequence we need. It starts with establishing a real sense of urgency and building a coalition early on, moves through creating those vital short-term wins to build up some momentum, and finally, it's about institutionalizing those new approaches into the actual DNA of the culture. It's a structured, proven journey from initial awareness all the way to permanent habit.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how Kotter separates management from leadership during these 8 steps. Management is your planning, your budgeting, controlling the complexity. That DICE framework we just looked at, that handles a lot of the management side. But leadership, that's about motivating people, shaping the culture, and navigating all that messy psychological uncertainty we talked about. To succeed, leaders absolutely must embody 2 things: visibility and consistency. You can't just announce a major shift and then go hide in your office. You manage the process, yes, but you must actively and visibly lead your people.
And finally, part 6, middle managers as change agents.
You know, we spend so much time focusing on the C-suite visionaries or the frontline workers, but as the research clearly shows, middle managers are the absolute unsung heroes here. They're the vital translators. They take that grand, sometimes super abstract strategic vision from the executives and figure out how to actually make it practical, achievable, and sustainable down on the shop floor.
Unfortunately, middle managers are constantly, and honestly unfairly, painted as the blockers to change. But the data tells a different story. They usually aren't blocking things out of malice. They resist because they haven't been given the tools or the input to properly shape the plan. Think about it. They have to change their own mindset while at the very same time managing the anxiety of their entire team. If top leadership actually empowers them, gives them a real voice in the design, and genuinely supports them, middle managers transform from perceived blockers into your absolute most powerful change agents.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question to chew on before you kick off your next major initiative. Remember that dysmemic pressure we talked about? Ask yourself, is your organization actually engineered to reward a comfortable consensus where everyone just smiles and nods and says everything is fine? Or have you designed structures that aggressively protect the hard truth, even when it's super uncomfortable? Because at the end of the day, you can't improve a process if your culture punishes the brave people who step up to tell you it's broken. Definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time.